Welcome, everyone. Hello. My name's Ken Rugg. I'm CEO of Tesora, and I'm very pleased to welcome everyone here today. I'm glad you could make it out. Hopefully you enjoy the venue and you can get a chance to check out some of the cars in the back and everything. We thought it was a little bit more fun than your traditional hotel lobby. So hopefully you'll be able to take advantage of that. But we've got a great agenda here for you today. We've got some great speakers, some panels, learning more about Trove. It's a great opportunity to get the Trove community together and also start introducing Trove to some people who maybe haven't learned a whole lot about it. Also, learn a little bit more about the state of OpenStack, and that's going to be our first speaker, our keynote. Really excited to have Alan Clark here to talk a little bit about the state of OpenStack and in the consumer world, and talk about what the future of OpenStack is and how that's evolving and how that is emerging in the enterprise and becoming much more mainstream in many cases, I think. So with that, I will turn it over to Alan, who's the chairman of the OpenStack Foundation. Chairman of the board. There you go. And I'll give you the clicker. And
sure, thank you.
Thanks.
Is my mic on? Should I sing? Can you hear me? Can you hear me in the back? No? I always love that. Can you hear me? No. How do you answer that when... Anyway. So, well, I appreciate being here. I'm actually excited that we're having a Trove Day. I think this is really cool. We need to start having these types of days with all the different projects within OpenStack. So let's see which way this goes. There we go. So some time ago, I have to start with the story, right? Some time ago, some friends and I decided we would travel out to a remote area called City of the Rocks. And so we jumped in our cars and traveled for several hours. And as we got close to our destination, we suddenly had 7 flat tires. It was kind of suspicious, by the way. Suddenly had 7 flat tires amongst 4 cars. Okay? Well, somewhat luckily, we were by what I'd call an old store. And I know you've seen these in the past, right? You're out in the middle of nowhere. The only place that even looks like sells commerce is an old store. So we were somewhat victim to this old store. We had 2 choices. One, we either could figure out a solution to our problem based on what he had in his store, or we could call for a tow truck, which was about 100 to 150 miles away, to have him come out and fix those 7 flat tires. So it was an interesting case. Now, it turns out that old stores are kind of a thing of the past. Most of them are just pictures on a postcard anymore, but there's a few of them that still exist out there. But in that model, we've very much transformed in our model today, right? So it used to be old store was the norm. And you would do your shopping at the old store, and what you bought was very much dependent on the seller. So the seller pretty much controlled the information you were able to get, very much controlled the choice that you had, and he very much controlled the price, right? And so it was very much a seller's market. Well, times have changed, and today it's changed to be very much a consumer's market. So much so that I got a report from Deloitte this week. They actually just published a report, and they were saying that the market has dramatically changed. They were talking about the influence of the internet and the influence of digital services, right? I had to take my phone away, but our little handheld smart devices have dramatically changed the market and changed it to the point where it's become a buyer's market instead of a seller's market. And they're saying that these little digital devices that we have in our hand has transformed the market and influenced about $1.7 trillion in sales last year. Okay, it's an amazing impact. And that's up from what they estimate to be $330 billion in 2012. Okay, so you can see the amount of influence that our electronics and digital access has made. So if you look back, not too far back, but if you look back to early 2012, 2010 timeframe and think about it, that's when we were all starting to get our little smart devices. Turns out the market was very fixated on the idea of I would go into the store, think about this, we always do this, would go into the store, kind of hunt down the device we were looking for, or technology, or the item that we were looking for, and then we would use our device to compare prices, right? We were fixated on getting the best price. So we would look up the item and see who was selling it online, and then we would order it online, okay? So a lot of the brick and mortar stores back in those days were suffering because they were the showrooms, but they weren't really getting the advantage of making the sell, right? So we were fixated on the idea of using them as a showroom and buying our stuff online. So we had the advent of e-commerce. Well, it turns out that we've gotten a little smarter since then. Around 2013, 2014 timeframe, we introduced what was called this digital information age. So we started not just using it for price comparison, but we really got more savvy and started using those devices to seek information, to do study about whatever it was we wanted to purchase, right? So we started to use that to get information. Well, looking forward to today, to 2015, what Deloitte was talking about is they're saying, we've actually come past that point. It used to be, it was a lot of pitting of e-commerce versus brick and mortar. And vendors have come to the conclusion now that it's not one or the other, but a combination of both. And shoppers and consumers have come to the conclusion that it's not one or the other, it's both, right? So they take advantage of both. And so they're estimating, in this report from Deloitte, that they're estimating that 64% of in-store sales, okay, so your brick and mortar sales, 64% of those are influenced by digital media, okay? So we're going out, we're doing our homework, and then we're going into brick and mortar stores to actually do our purchases, okay? So we've come a long ways. But the buyers changed, okay? So it's not that we're just searching web pages and finding technical information about products, but the other thing they found out is that they're estimating that 40%, and I'm not a millennial, you can see by the gray hair, but they're estimating that 40% of millennials actually do their research using social media, okay? So part of their influence in buying is social media. So it's not just the technicals of looking up information, but it's also asking their friends, what do you think? Should I buy this? Looking at other people's experiences on products and services. So a great transformation, and hopefully you can start to envision in your mind what used to be a simple data of price comparison is now a much more complex system of information about products, how they're used, who's using them, and sharing all that social information. So what's interesting is this has had a great impact on the vendors, okay? So vendors are having to transform. So there's sophistication and what I've heard people like Walmart phrase as omni-consumers is transforming our IT industry, okay? They're having to meet the needs of the user at the moment, at what they call their moment of need, okay? 2012, that moment of need was at the time of purchase. Today, that moment of need varies, okay? Typically, when I'm looking for items such as food, I'm looking for inspiration. Oh, what should we eat tonight? Okay, well, let's go out and see what's out there. Or I'm trying to want to cook something new. Let's go out there and see what recipe I can find, right? So I'm looking for inspiration. So it's not the time of purchase, but it's the time when I'm starting to get hungry and trying to figure out what I'm hungry for, okay? So it could be way up front, time of inspiration. It could be the point where I'm browsing, okay? Doing some research. That's my moment of need. It could be the point of I'm doing selection, trying to decide between this or that. Moment of need could be the point of purchase. I'm strictly looking for price, doing price comparison between vendors, right? Or it could be a moment of need, could be I bought the dang thing, now I need service. Can't figure out how to work it, can't find the user manual, can't find the owner's manual. It's broken, I need to return it. That's my moment of need, okay? So the needs have greatly expanded in the last few years. It's not just a purchasing decision, it's the whole gamut of I'm thinking about an idea to I need help, okay? A lot of different data opportunities there again, if you think about this. So those moments of need have expanded, and to meet those needs, IT services have had to change, okay? So that's the impetus of change. That change requires that your IT be much more agile. I'm going to throw out the words here, right? They need to be agile. They need to be elastic, because meeting that moment of need means means that the vendor has to be responsive, immediately responsive, right? I could be doing my shopping at midnight. I could be doing my shopping at 10 a.m. And so forth. So I got to be responsive immediately. So I've got to be elastic as a vendor. I've got to be elastic. I've got to be agile. I've got to have rapid response. Okay? I know you've heard those words, and we typically tie those to cloud, because cloud becomes the great technical solution to solve that business need for those vendors who's trying to address those immediate needs of their business consumers. Okay? So, all this transformation into digital information is transforming the way we do business and creates an opportunity for cloud. So we want to talk about OpenStack, and I know this is going to be a boring slide, because I hope you've seen, but I felt like we had to throw it up here, right? So why OpenStack? What's OpenStack about? We're building cloud. We're building open source cloud. How many have been involved with OpenStack for more than a year? 2 years? 3 years? 4 years? 5 years? Now, if I say 6, you better put your hand out. Yeah. So we're a very new project, actually. I'm also on the board of directors for the Linux Foundation, so I've been involved with open source for many, many years, and in particular with Linux for a long, long time. And that's an old project, right? It's over 20 years old. So relatively, OpenStack is a very new project. But it just boggles me at how quickly it has grown, right? From the original 2 projects to over 25 projects. We're talking 20 million lines of code, and my data here is probably out of date, because this was as of our last board meeting in Vancouver. 29,000 members, 500 companies and organizations that are involved with the project. It's a huge progress, a lot of progress in less than 5 years. We're pretty excited. We've got over 170 countries involved, which makes for some really interesting diversity discussions, which we're having at the board of directors right now, trying to make sure we can incorporate all the different cultures, deal with the geographical distances and so forth, try to make sure we can have everybody involved as much as possible. Have tons of contributions, not just in code, but in documentation and support and answering questions, giving presentations at the different events and so forth. So it's a very, very active community, and I'm hoping that each of you are finding it a very pleasant community to be part of. And we've been tracking, and I'll come back to this, we've been tracking over 1,000 clouds that are in use using OpenStack. So we've got wide adoption, and we'll talk about some of those adoptions here in just a minute, just to give you some ideas of how it's being used. But I always get the question, why OpenStack? What is it that's different about OpenStack? And I love the question because it's a fun one to answer because it's actually pretty easy. So the first one is we're delivering, right? We have a ton of people using it in a wide variety of ways. The beauty of having so many vendors and different organizations that are involved, they all come in with a particular focus and direction that they want to take OpenStack and use it. So we've got everything from vendors targeting the enterprise to targeting on-prem services to doing public clouds and public hosted and private hosted and all the varieties in between. And we got the vendors that are focused on specific aspects of OpenStack and delivering particular services, such as database services that we're talking about today. So we're able to deliver. We're able to deliver a variety of solutions tailored to the needs of the business that's targeting those particular markets of consumers. We've got the benefits of open source. And that's a very, very interesting discussion because, as you noticed, we have like 29,000 members. Not all of those are contributing code, okay? So we have a variety of people that are involved. We even have lawyers that are coming and participating, so we have fun discussions. But one of the benefits that we've learned through this community is we also have the users and those that are consuming OpenStack that are participating. What that allows us to do is have a direct conversation. So the vendors benefit because they're able to talk to those that are consuming the technology. The consumers of the technology benefit because they get to come and talk straight to the engineers and get the straight scoop. So it creates an open and transparent dialogue between those that are consuming, those that are using, and those that are building. The other beautiful thing here about OpenStack is we're not just solving the immediate need, but we're also being very innovative, okay? And Trove is one of those areas, and we'll talk about this here in a second, that I deem to be very innovative and future-looking, okay? And if you've been watching the news lately, what you're finding is that the innovation in our industry is happening in open source, okay? All the latest ideas and new technologies, they're happening within open source. Because through open source, we can innovate rapidly, openly and transparently, and collaborate together, okay? And it works. And then the last one, one thing that is different here, and is what I talked about a minute ago, is this notion that IT is transforming, okay? Businesses are being forced to transform to meet the needs of their customers. This is forcing the IT to transform, and it's a good thing, right? We've seen the books that says, you know, IT doesn't matter anymore. CIOs don't matter. We should get rid of them. They're an expense. They're a cost. But really what is happening is they're transforming to play a new role, okay? And IT is becoming basically a service organization. And they're able to rapidly respond to the lines of business needs. So it's a very positive thing that is happening. And by responding, they can play a very pivotal role in that business, right? Getting lines of communication open within the business. I've talked to tons of CIOs around the world. It's amazing how many of them are beginning to model their organizations around open source paradigms. It's pretty interesting. So let's talk a little bit about what it is that OpenStack delivers. And I just threw some logos up here. These that I threw up here and the cases I'm going to talk about are all out there on OpenStack.org. So you can go read the case studies for yourself. But what I wanted to highlight is a little bit about how OpenStack is being used today, okay? And so if we look at some of these, for example, PayPal was one that we had, I can't remember which OpenStack event. I think it was San Diego, might have been San Francisco. So they were one of the first early on adopters. And what they talked about and what they focused on was the notion that they wanted their customers to be able to make payments. So they're a payment industry, right? They wanted to enable their customers to make payment anytime and in any way possible. Okay, so it's kind of visionary for back then when they first started looking at this technology. But if you look at PayPal, I'm starting to see it pop up within stores, right? I go into stores and now I see you can pay using PayPal. So again, it goes back to that consumer need, right? The consumers want to be able to address their immediate need at the time of purchase, which means I want to use my smart device to pay for whatever, right? Whenever I'm in the store, or not just online when I'm buying something from an e-commerce site. So they were able to see that and recognize that cloud would give them that ability. Another vendor, Cisco, with WebEx, we use WebEx actually quite a bit on the board of directors. They chose OpenStack because they realized with cloud services, the service that they're delivering, they could not schedule downtime, okay? Thing had to be up 24/7, so they needed to be able to have an infrastructure that allowed them to stay up without having any scheduled downtime. Second reason they picked OpenStack was they wanted to have control, okay? They looked at other offerings, they looked at private cloud or public cloud offerings, okay, and realized, we're placing too much control in a black box, and so they felt they needed to control themselves. So it goes back to that notion of open source. So they wanted to be able to control their own destiny, as they put it. Another interesting case, Cyberport. We met these folks at the summit there in Hong Kong, and they are basically a public hosting service, and they're focused on new startups. So one of the big issues if you're a new startup is CapEx, right? You've got to invest. Traditionally, you had to invest in IT infrastructure and sink a lot of cost into getting some type of IT up so that you could build your services and build your digital presence. And what these folks focus on is the ability to get those startups up and running with minimal CapEx, right? Turn it into OpEx, can spin up your startup very quickly and rapidly by just using their services. And so they focus on that. So overall, lowers their cost, a new startup's cost, but exponentially gives them much more computing power than they could initially do on their own if they were to try to through CapEx, build their own. Another example would be GoDaddy, for example. They actually, when they looked at OpenStack, they developed a set of criteria, and if you look at their use case, they actually spell out that criteria. So they looked at implementation costs, they looked at server requirements and manpower requirements, resource requirements that it would take to get the thing up and running. They looked at cost per compute, they looked at cost per storage, and then they looked at the solution's maturity and longevity, so the viability of the community. Is it going to be around, right, in the future? Can they depend on it? And so they looked at all those factors, and that's what got them started in looking at OpenStack. Some others, Comcast. I think we met Comcast first at Atlanta, and I know they spoke in Vancouver as well. They have a very interesting use case. They actually, a lot of times we talk about data center consolidation and pulling things, together so we can get more resource consumption on fewer servers and so forth. They actually have a different model. They actually have found that they're trying to push those services as close to the customer as they can get them. And if you think about it, what they're trying to give them is that service of video, right? So you want to minimize that latency. And so their model is quite different. And so they looked at OpenStack as meeting their needs of being able to push those services to the consumers as close as they can get it. And then secondly, they looked at it and said, okay, we're going to invest in this. We also need to look at the future, what's coming next for OpenStack. And so things like database as a service is part of what excited them. How much time have I got? I don't have a... Somebody's going to have to give me the cutoff signal. Anyway, let's move on. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of a feel here for some of the people and how they're using OpenStack. But the thing, the reason I wanted to point those out is very interesting. So OpenStack does a survey every 6 months, and you've probably all hopefully have gone out and seen the results of those. This is from the last one. And it's actually very similar to what I expected. And if you've seen Mark Collier's or Jonathan's presentations, they've built a slide based on this. And what that slide is telling us is the adoption and who's using which components within OpenStack. And those top ones are basically the Nova, Swift, networking, orchestration, right? Dashboard, those basic components, okay? So you would expect that upper section of that slide are the ones that are very widely deployed, okay? They're actually a little more mature. They've been out longer, but so the slide didn't surprise me. The thing that I found interesting is if you really look what those are focused on, and compare those to the customers or consumers that are using OpenStack, really goes back to show that what we've really been focused on is computing needs, okay? So they're really focused on delivering and computing, showing prices, showing web pages, and showing information to the consumer, okay? But the part that I really found interesting was the bottom part of the slide, and this is what I call the future of OpenStack. So I get the question a lot, what is the future of OpenStack? What's coming next? And the part of this slide, the bottom part of this survey is actually, to me, what's coming next, okay? So as we focus back on the consumer and users of OpenStack, it's been very heavy on the compute side, so building your efficient and agile and elastic compute farms, okay? But the users are getting more sophisticated, right? Back in 2012, it was all about get my web page up quickly, make sure I can respond as fast or faster than my competitor, because the user's not going to wait, right? But the users are getting much more sophisticated, and commerce is changing. It's no longer e-commerce versus brick and mortar commerce, it's commerce. And so as these users get more sophisticated, they want more sophisticated users, okay? So before, back in this top slide, it's all about quickly just pumping data and information, responding to the request, but not really understanding who the request is coming from, okay? But just making sure I can respond as quickly as I can. But the second part down here is more about the futures, which is about building a relationship and understanding more about who the consumer is, okay? So I see two aspects of this. The first one is, and we've heard a lot about it, this is the big data, right? So the top part focuses on getting that information as requested. The big data discussion is about, let's find out what we can. Let's extract information from you about who you are, right? Then try to correlate that with all the different devices you're asking from and what you're asking about so that I can tailor a message to you to entice you to do more, okay? So extract information, mine it, manage it down, turn it into, tailored advertising or whatever so I can entice you to do more. So that's part of down here, it's the big data part. But I also think there's even a better part which gets into the database as a service part. And that ties back into what we call Internet of Things. Now I know we see a lot of hokey stuff, we talk about USB toasters and smart refrigerators and so forth. I even saw there's a toothbrush out there now that has a USB port on it, and you can plug it in, and it drives to an app, and it'll tell you what time, the next time you need to brush your teeth or whatever. So I think a lot of these are kind of like, okay, we're fishing, trying to come up with good ideas. But I also think that people are catching on. We may not have the right devices, but people are catching on that as consumers, we actually do want to have a relationship with the vendors, okay? So let me give you an example. There's a sports shoe. I won't tell you the vendor, but they've actually built sensors into the shoe, okay? So those sensors now, you can play those during, and they gave an example that you wear these shoes during the game, and those sensors are not just tracking how many steps you took, but they can also track how high you jumped, how many times you jumped, how efficient your jump was, okay? So it starts gathering this data. So we're used to that, right? With the Internet of Things, we got all these weird devices that are gathering data. But what people haven't really figured out is what to do with that data. So what these folks have figured out is basically there's 3 things to do with that data. One is you can pump that data back to you. I can put a little app, put it on my phone so I can look at it and go, wow, I jumped so many inches high, right? Second part is they said, let's pump that data to social media. So you can brag to your friends that says, hey, I jumped, so many inches high. The third part, though, they figured out is they can pump that data back to the vendor, and that vendor can come back and give you advice on, hey, if you did this, you could actually jump even higher, okay? So that's building a relationship. So it's not just extracting information from you that they can use, but building that relationship so they can figure out how to help you and you can help them, okay? So it's building that relationship. To me, that's where this is heading, is these services down here are more about building a relationship with the consumers, okay? That requires data, right? But it's how we use that data, and I think that's a big key of where we're heading with these new services within OpenStack. Now, the second thing we learned here from this survey, if you'll notice there on the Trove piece, there's 2 pieces of data in here, and I made it very small so I wouldn't feel so bad that you have to have glasses. But if you notice this, the number of proof of concepts for Trove has gone up to 19%. That's actually up from 16% from 6 months ago. So we're on the right track. It's going up. The number of deployments that are actually in production has gone up from 9% to 12%. So we're definitely on the right track. We're heading in the right direction. I know we've got critics out there. That's good, right? We get to hear their criticisms and where they think we are in our shortcomings. That's part of being in the community, is we get to hear all that and we get to figure it out and talk and figure out how to fix our stuff to make it work even better. So what are we building tomorrow? We're embracing new ideas and new approaches to solving problems, okay? So it's kind of like the shoes. They may be quirky ideas, but they get us thinking, they get us contemplating and coming up with solutions to the consumers that we're trying to address and address their immediate needs. We can analyze, we can optimize, and our challenge is, okay, as I talked about at the beginning, our customers are getting smarter, okay? We're getting much more sophisticated in the use of digital technologies and digital media. And so our solutions have got to get much more sophisticated, and we have to get to the point where we can anticipate their needs and begin to exceed their expectations. And again, it's part of building that continuous relationship. So it's not that old e-commerce, let's throw out some web pages and beat everybody by price. It's understanding who that customer is, how they're using our technology, and building that continuous relationship. That's our distinctive advantage, and that is our future. So what are the things that OpenStack is thinking about, particularly the foundation? Where are we heading next? has a lot to do with attracting developers, attracting applications to our OpenStack audience, our ecosystem. Second part is building interoperability, and you saw announcements around this up in Vancouver. We've got 500 vendors. We don't want to have 500 different solutions that don't interoperate together, right? That would be a disaster. So a key piece of OpenStack is making sure that the community works and talks together, and our products, when they say OpenStack, interoperate together efficiently. So you're going to see a big focus on that over the next coming year. And then thirdly, we want to drive our ecosystem and ensure that we've got the right tools and the right set of applications. All right, so I think I've talked probably over my time, but let me end here. It's just an exciting time to be part of OpenStack. I hope you guys find it as exciting as well. Definitely want to hear from you today. If you have any concerns or comments, love positive comments as well as negative, so that as the board we can work those out. Would love to hear those comments from you. But it is a very exciting time to be part of OpenStack. It's growing, it's expanding, we're increasing with the number of technologies that are part of the project. It just brings more opportunity, gives us much more opportunities to not just deploy, but to experiment and to learn and to grow. So we've got a solid core. As you can see from that survey, we've got a solid core that's out there, it's deployed, it's being used by people around the world in many different ways, and yet we're positioned to take on the future and incorporate new ideas and new experiences so we can build a relationship with those that are consuming and using OpenStack. And I thank you for your time.